My best friend's dad moved in with us after his divorce. Then I found out why his wife really left. I, 32M, never thought I'd find myself in the middle of someone else's family drama, but here I am. My best friend and I have known each other since college, and we've been roommates for the past 5 years. We have a comfortable 3-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy, but it's home. About 6 months ago, his dad's 20-year marriage imploded seemingly out of nowhere. My friend was devastated. His parents had always seemed like the perfect couple, high school sweethearts who still held hands at family dinners and took annual vacations together. According to what his dad told everyone, his mom had found someone else and wanted to rediscover herself. It sounded like typical midlife crisis stuff, and we all rallied around his dad, who seemed genuinely blindsided by the whole thing. When my friend suggested his dad stay with us temporarily while he figured out his next steps, I agreed without hesitation. The man had always been kind to me, treating me like a second son during college breaks when I couldn't afford to fly home. We had the spare room, and it seemed like the decent thing to do. He moved in with promises that it would only be for a month or two until he found his own place. That was 4 months ago. At first, everything was fine. He was clean, paid his share of utilities, and even cooked dinner for us sometimes. He seemed sad but functional, going to work every day and spending evenings watching TV or reading. I felt bad for him, watching a middle-aged man trying to rebuild his life after having the rug pulled out from under him. Then the small things started happening. It began with the drinking. Not excessive at first, a beer or two with dinner, then maybe a nightcap. But soon he was having a drink with lunch on weekends, then pre-dinner cocktails, then nightcaps that turned into 3 or 4 whiskeys before bed. He wasn't getting belligerent or anything, just checked out. Melancholy. My friend didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he made excuses. Dad's just going through a tough time, he'd say. Wouldn't you drink if your marriage fell apart? Then came the phone calls. Late at night, I'd hear him in his room, voice rising and falling in angry whispers. Sometimes I'd catch snippets. You had no right, or after everything I did for you. I assumed he was talking to his ex-wife, and I tried to give him privacy. Everyone deserves to work through their pain in their own way. 3 weeks ago, I came home early from work with a splitting headache. I took some pain relievers and was drifting off for a nap when I heard him on the phone again. But this time he was in the living room, thinking no one was home. I don't care what she told you, he said, his voice clearer than I'd ever heard it during these calls. She's always been unstable, always exaggerating. A pause. No, you listen to me. I'm still your father, and I deserve some respect. She's turning you against me with these ridiculous accusations. It took me a moment to realize he wasn't talking to his ex-wife. He was talking to his daughter, my friend's younger sister. I'd met her several times over the years. She was about 6 years younger than us, just finishing up graduate school in another state. Unlike my friend, she hadn't been around much since the divorce. In fact, I realized, she hadn't visited once since her dad moved in. I tried to forget about it. Family drama isn't my business, and divorce makes people say harsh things. But something about his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A few days later, I was looking for a screwdriver to fix a loose cabinet hinge in the bathroom. My friend was at work, and his dad had gone grocery shopping. I checked my friend's room first, then reluctantly tried his dad's room when I couldn't find what I needed. His room was meticulously neat, almost obsessively so. I spotted a toolbox in the closet and was rummaging through it when I accidentally knocked over a small box on the shelf above. Photos spilled out across the floor. They were family photos, holidays, vacations, birthdays, spanning what looked like the entire marriage. As I gathered them up, I noticed something odd. In almost every picture, my friend's mom looked tense. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. In the later photos, she seemed to be standing slightly apart from her husband, even in group shots. Tucked at the bottom of the pile was a photo I'd never seen before. It was just my friend's mom, alone, sitting on a porch swing. Her face was relaxed, genuinely happy, in a way it wasn't in any of the other pictures. On the back, written in what I recognized as my friend's sister's handwriting, were the words, "Mom's first week free, 2023. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, found the screwdriver, and left the room with an uneasy feeling. That night, I couldn't sleep. The photo, the phone conversation, the drinking, something wasn't adding up. The story we'd all accepted about this poor, abandoned husband didn't feel right anymore. The next day, I did something I'm not proud of. While my friend and his dad were both out, I searched online for my friend's sister's contact information. I found her email through her university's directory and sent her a message, asking if we could talk. I was careful, saying only that I had some concerns about her dad living with us and wanted her perspective. She responded within an hour, asking if we could video chat that evening. Her eagerness made my uneasiness grow. At 9 p.m., I took my laptop to a coffee shop a few blocks away for privacy. When her face appeared on the screen, she looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she kept glancing nervously off camera, as if afraid someone might overhear her. "Thank you for reaching out," she said. "I've been worried sick about my brother." For the next hour, she told me a story that made my stomach turn. The perfect marriage we'd all witnessed had been a carefully constructed facade. Behind closed doors, her father had been controlling and emotionally abusive for years. He monitored her mother's phone, controlled their finances, isolated her from friends who weren't good influences, and created elaborate punishments disguised as consequences for perceived transgressions. "He never hit her," she said, which is why she doubted herself for so long. He would tell her she was crazy when she called out his behavior. Classic gaslighting. She had witnessed it all growing up, but didn't have the vocabulary to name it until college, when a psychology class opened her eyes. Her brother, my friend, had been largely shielded from it. Their father had always treated him differently, putting him on a pedestal while constantly undermining her and her mother. Mom finally left when I convinced her she wasn't imagining things. I recorded some of Dad's episodes for her to listen to later, when he would deny saying hurtful things or making threats. Hearing it played back was a wake-up call. The someone else her mother had supposedly left for? It was actually a support group for survivors of emotional abuse. The rediscovering herself was her finally getting therapy and rebuilding her sense of self-worth. "I'm worried about my brother," she said, her voice breaking. "Dad's always been able to manipulate him, and now they're living together without Mom as a buffer." She trailed off, but her implication was clear. "Has your dad ever been manipulative toward you or your brother?" I asked carefully. She laughed bitterly. "Toward me? Constantly. Toward my brother? Not in the same way. He's always seen my brother as an extension of himself, the golden child. But that comes with its own kind of pressure and control." After we hung up, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, trying to process everything. Parts of her story aligned with behaviors I'd noticed. The controlling phone calls, the drinking when things weren't going his way, the different way he spoke about his daughter versus his son. But my friend had never mentioned anything like this. Either he was completely oblivious, or he was in denial, or his sister was exaggerating. I didn't want to believe that someone I'd welcomed into my home could be so different from the person he presented to the world. Over the next week, I paid closer attention. I noticed how his dad would make subtle comments undermining my friend's decisions about his job, his workout routine, even what he ate for breakfast. Always couched as concern or jokes, but constant. I saw how my friend would adjust his behavior in response, almost unconsciously. I saw how his dad would forget to do household chores, then make my friend feel guilty for asking about them. How he would interrupt conversations or change the subject when it wasn't focused on him. How he would use his grief to manipulate. "I'm just so broken since your mother left," whenever he wanted something. The final straw came last weekend. My friend mentioned he was thinking of taking a weekend trip to visit his mom, the first time he'd considered seeing her since the divorce. His dad's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. His face darkened momentarily before he composed himself and launched into a monologue about how fragile he was feeling and how abandoned he would be with my friend gone, even for 2 days. My friend immediately backtracked, saying he could visit his mom another time. The look of satisfaction that briefly crossed his dad's face made my blood run cold. That night, I pulled my friend aside and gently asked if he'd been in contact with his sister recently. He looked uncomfortable and admitted they'd had a falling out right after the divorce. "She's taking Mom's side," he said dismissively. "She's always been dramatic." The words were his, but I could hear his father's influence in them. "Have you considered that there might be more to the divorce than your dad has told us?" I asked carefully. He got defensive immediately. "What are you talking about? My mom cheated and left. End of story. Has she ever said that herself?" He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. "We haven't exactly been talking," he admitted. "But Dad said, maybe you should hear her side," I suggested. "And your sister's." Before deciding, he stormed off, angry at me for suggesting his father might not be telling the whole truth. I spent a sleepless night wondering if I'd overstepped. The next morning, he was quiet at breakfast. His dad tried to engage him in their usual banter, but my friend responded with one-word answers. After his dad left for work, my friend turned to me. "I called my sister last night," he said quietly. "We talked for 3 hours. The look on his face told me everything. Shock, confusion, grief, and the beginnings of recognition. She had journal entries, recordings, text messages, years of them." He continued, his voice hollow. "Things Dad said and did that I never saw, or maybe didn't want to see. He told me how his mother had tried to tell him the truth when she left, but he had refused to listen, already convinced by his father's version of events. How his sister had been trying to reach out to him for months, but he dismissed her concerns as attention-seeking. "I need to see my mom," he said finally. "I need to hear it from her." He left that afternoon, driving the 3 hours to where his mother was now living. His dad blew up his phone the entire time he was gone, alternating between guilt trips and angry accusations. My friend turned his phone off. He returned late Sunday night. I was still up, waiting. One look at his face told me everything he'd learned had confirmed his worst fears. "He's not who I thought he was all he said before going to his room. The next morning, we sat his dad down together. My friend was calm but firm. His dad needed to find his own place within the next 2 weeks. No extensions, no excuses. His dad's reaction was revealing. First came disbelief, then manipulation, then anger, and finally, when nothing worked, cold fury. He looked at me with naked hatred, correctly identifying me as the catalyst for this confrontation. "You had no right to interfere in family matters," he spat. "You made it my business when you moved into my home," I replied evenly. He moved out 3 days later, not even staying the full 2 weeks. The apartment feels lighter somehow, as if a storm cloud has lifted. My friend is in therapy now, working through his complicated feelings about both his parents. He's rebuilding his relationship with his sister and taking careful steps to reconnect with his mom. It's painful watching him realize that his childhood wasn't what he thought it was, that the father he idolized had another side. Sometimes I wonder if I should have minded my own business. But then I remember that photo of his mom on the porch swing, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen on her face, and the words written on the back, "Mom's first week free." I think about how his dad might still be here, slowly turning my friend into a reflection of himself, if I hadn't noticed the signs. I think about his sister's relief when her brother finally called her, ready to listen. I think about cycles of manipulation and how they only end when someone is willing to break the pattern. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone you care about is help them see the truth they've been trained not to notice. As for his dad, we heard he's telling everyone who will listen that his ungrateful son abandoned him in his time of need, painting himself as the victim once again. Some people believe him. But now, at least, my friend isn't one of them.